Hello, you're watching the development vlog for Shokin, a multi-platform waitlist management tool soon to be available on Android and iOS. This week is week 49 of development. The current status is that the Android alpha version is ready and available for testing on Google Play Store, and the iOS TestFlight is coming up next. Last week there are two goals. Number one is to select a LLM coding assistant, and number two is to investigate and quantify the impact of iOS TestFlight integration. The LLM selection was complete. I settled on Codex again. Just for context, there are three major competitors on the market: Claude Code, Codex CLI, and then Gemini CLI. Before October, I had been using Codex CLI for most of my coding assistant work, but I took a month of hiatus abroad, and many things took place during that period of time. Claude released Sonnet 4.5 and Opus 4.5. Gemini released Gemini 3, which received a lot of attention online, and Codex had a little version bump from 5.0 to 5.1, and in addition to that, they introduced a more efficient and perhaps cheaper to run for them model, which is the Codex 5.1. They call it Codex 5.1 Max, I believe. And just to be clear, the Max is different than the thinking level of the model itself. You can still specify 5.1 Codex Max Low, but that's neither here nor there. In any case, I tested all three of them. Gemini CLI's tooling still needs a lot of improvement. The model is quite nice. Well, let me take it back a little bit. The model is quite nice to speak to, but for whatever reason, from my personal experience, the model itself doesn't seem, along with its combination of system prompts and user prompts and stuff like that, doesn't seem to have the best knowledge in Kotlin Multiplatform and Compose Multiplatform, which is really puzzling for me because Google, the maker of Gemini, is also the maker and the collaborator of Kotlin, KMP, as well as Compose Multiplatform. So I don't understand well, I guess I could understand. For a company this big, different components might as well be different companies in terms of the flow of information. So Codex CLI failed for me for two reasons. Number one, the tooling really needs improvement. I mean, it's nowhere near as good as Claude Code, and certainly hasn't caught up to Codex either. And number two, the model itself, I have not had a good experience using it for my project, which is Kotlin Multiplatform again, and despite the fact that it's quite nice and pleasant to talk to. Cloud, I was using Claude earlier this year, but one of the biggest issues with Claude, well, first of all, Claude is like Claude Code, the tooling is fantastic. It's probably the best LLM coding assistant that's available on the market right now. It's got everything. Anything that you can even think of that you would want from a command line interface coding assistant, Claude Code has it for you. That's the most enjoyable way of interacting with a coding assistant. That said, I have qualms with the model, and that's part of the reason why I unsubscribed from Claude. And I was paying $200 to them every month for the privilege of using Claude Opus. In terms of the language knowledge and framework knowledge for KMP, as well as Compose Multiplatform, Claude Code is actually quite decent. It knows a decent amount of it. Obviously, it's not the most up-to-date. KMP and Compose Multiplatform get developed so frequently that I wouldn't expect any LLM to have the latest information on it. So the knowledge coverage part of it is actually quite good, and the execution is not bad either. And just to be clear, over the last month when I was testing Claude the model actually managed to fix one of the UI issues that both Gemini and Codex failed to fix. So, in terms of the raw power, I suppose, Claude Opus 4.5 is actually really not bad. The biggest issue that I have with Claude is that its personality. It's overly optimistic way of approaching things. And that was actually one of the biggest reasons I stopped using Claude Code in the first place. There is a meme on Claude Code subreddit. You are absolutely right. And that surfaces the first problem with Claude Code, which is it doesn't stand its ground. If it tells you something and then you even so much as mildly challenging it, not necessarily in a way that you intend to challenge, like for instance, if I wanted clarification for something, I would ask not in a forceful way saying that you didn't do it right, but in a more suggestive way, can you explain this to me? Or maybe perhaps this is that way. And I just want to hear its explanation. Maybe it's got some thoughts that I didn't consider. Right? As soon as you use any of this language, as soft as you can manage, Claude immediately thinks that it had made a mistake and then apologizes in the form of saying, you are absolutely right. It always leads with, you are absolutely right. And the thing is, I've gotten so much shell shock from seeing that. Every time when I see, you are absolutely right, I got chills on my back, because that, as soon as you start seeing that, you start to realize that you can no longer trust the content or the output that Claude gives you, because your previous language just steered it away from what it's supposed to do, if that makes any sense. So that's the problem number one. Claude doesn't stand its ground. And I've made a lot of mistakes in that way, because a lot of times before I realized that this is Claude's personality, a wishy-washy pushover, I trusted its judgment, but its judgment was influenced by my language, my input, and as a result, not trustworthy. So I'm not doing that again. And number two, this is perhaps even a bigger problem. Claude lies. It lies all the time. And the funny thing about this is that it doesn't lie straight to your face. It usually wouldn't, unless it hallucinates, in which case it's not really lying. It just doesn't know that it's lying. But that's neither here nor there. All models hallucinate, so you're going to have to control that. What it does lie, the way that it lies is quite unique. It either tells white lies or it diverts your attention away from things that you ought to be paying attention to. To give you one example, if you were to ask it to do something for you, and it tries to do it, and it fails, it succeeds in some aspects and then fails in others. Let's say that you're asking it to do a big, I'm not going to call it a big job. Let's say it's some, like, changing 3 files, right? And the change is related and linked in all 3 files. If let's say that it managed to change 2 files, but one file had a file lock or some issue that it just can't open or something, more often than not, at least in my situation, Claude would report back to you after it's completed its task, oh, successfully changed the files. But it would fail to alert to you the fact that one of the files that you asked it to change, it just couldn't get into it. So it would sort of downplay that particular failure. In other words, to highlight the success that Claude has achieved, but doesn't tell you the important part that you ought to be paying attention to fix. That drives me nuts, because after every task, Claude or any LLM will give you a summary of what it has done. And if Claude decides to underplay it, it not only minimizes the amount of text on the screen, but also sort of uses language techniques to also downplay the importance of it. So it makes it even easier for you to just miss it. And now, granted, you could say, you should have read every single word. Yes, I understand that. But that also introduces additional mental load on me when I have to read Claude output, and that's just not where I like to spend my time and money. So those two big issues, number one, not standing your ground, and number two, like lying, had made Claude just a non-starter for me. And the funny thing is, last month they even gave me a free month of Opus, a $200 worth of value, right? And I tried it, and model improved in terms of knowledge and execution, but the lying part and the not standing your ground part continued to be an issue plaguing Claude. So I'm not using Claude. Codex, very interesting. I am on Codex Plus, I think, the ChatGPT Plus subscription, $20 a month. $20 a month. And I've seen some posts online about Codex tightening its noose on the amount of tokens you can use on your $20 subscription or even $200 subscription. I've now found myself needing more than that. When I was heavily doing it, I had 2 subscriptions that I rotate over, and that was plenty enough for me. I never really needed to shell out $200 a month for the Codex, the ChatGPT Pro subscription. And I very much enjoy Codex. It's not the most up to date compared to Claude with regards to like internal knowledge of Kotlin Multiplatform or Compose Multiplatform. But what it does do is that if it doesn't know, it would look up. For some reason, maybe it's in the system prompt or the user prompt that the ChatGPT team have managed to put in. Like it somehow knows when it's not sure about certain syntax, certain library usage, it would actually look up without me asking it. Claude, you have to tell it to. It just tries to not to use tool calls as much as possible. Presumably because it costs them money, or maybe they just couldn't figure out a way to make it work. But Codex, it does look it up. It does make sure that the stuff that it puts in makes sense and meets the latest specs by looking things up. That's number one. Number two, it doesn't lie. I had a screenshot. I don't know if I can find it. If I can find it, I'll paste it here. But if I can't find it, I had a screenshot of like literally one time when I asked it to do something, it straight up said, "Sorry, I can't do it." Like it straight up told me that it can't do it. And I very much appreciated that. And then I asked it to explain to me why it can't do it. And it showed me all the steps that it took and why all the previous attempts failed. So that gave me a lot of debugging information for me to actually implement it myself as opposed to waiting for it to complete, right? Had this, this would never happen in Claude. Claude would just lie or at least print out a very long form report saying everything that it has done and it's production quality, the best you can expect. And then in one tiny line tell you, oh, by the way, this isn't actually ready. Codex would just straight up tell you, first line, I can't do it. That's very good. I mean, I can rely on Codex and I can rely on it not telling lies. It's very straight up, straightforward. It's very succinct. And oh man, after having used Claude for months, this is really fresh breath of air. So people complain about degradation in LLM quality. It's never been confirmed, by the way. It's the tinfoil hat situation. People say, by the time they need to train a new model, they don't have enough compute resources, so they just use a lower quantization version of the LLM to serve you. That may be true, but so far I haven't really experienced that with Codex. So I'm happily using Codex. That's the first task for last week. Long story short, among the 3 major competitors that I've chosen to continue to use Codex for its simplicity as well as its pricing at cost. I mean, it's really hard to beat now. Okay, the second task that I accomplished was identifying, sort of figuring out what's going on with the iOS TestFlight implementation. And oh boy, I'm gonna complain about the iOS for a little while. By the way, I myself am an iOS user. I have an iPhone. I like to use Apple Watch. I mean, the integration and everything like that, the overall experience with them is quite nice. But I had never known that their developer experience is actually subpar. At least from my experience, it's not as good as Android. And for one example, let's say that you want to write an Android app right now. You can just go to Google and you can download Android Studio and you can write something and then you can run and it will run in the emulator inside your computer and it'll just run, right? And that's okay. iOS can do that as well. In Android, you can also directly deploy onto any of your test devices, so long as the device is not I think locked. I don't know whether or not carrier lock has anything to do with this, but so long as it's not, so long as it can be rooted, that you have root access to it, you can just install it onto your device, and it's fine. You can run it. You can run it today if you wanted to. You don't ever have to get in touch with Google Play Store. Now, that said, Google is trying to do something different. I think a couple of weeks ago, I read news articles about them saying that they want to prevent site loading of apps. I think they reneged on that. So I don't actually know where they currently stand. So I think Google's trying to become more Apple and become more controlling. But I think the community is pushing back, which is a very good idea. In any case, now you can just write an app, put it on your Android phone, and just works. So I've been working under the assumption that it'd be similar to that on iOS. Oh, no, 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 no. It's not. Anything that goes onto your iPhone has to be signed by Apple. This includes inside development. This includes even on your personal debug phone. This is crazy. So for it to work with iOS, you first have to pay Apple a tribute of $100 a month, not a month, sorry, a year to become a developer. And then they'll grant you a license. Oi, you got a license for that? Now I do. And then what happens is you will then be given the privilege of enrolling your personal devices as test devices. And you can only enroll 100 devices per year. Wow, okay, that's more than I really need, or more than really any developer needs. But the thing is, there's a limit. With Android, any phone, any unrooted phone can become a test device. In any case, so once your device is enrolled, then Apple grants you the privilege of signing your app such that it can be deployed on your physical device. So every time when I build my iOS app to be tested on my iOS phone, I have to use the certificate that Apple grants me, which, by the way, expires every year, that you have to renew with your $100 per year subscription, and then deploy the app onto my personal phone. And as you can imagine, that introduces a lot of complexity, specifically regarding key management and signature management. Locally, sure. Xcode does provide some, nice, convenient ways. For instance, I believe that there's a box that says, let Xcode manage your keys and certificates for you, signing certificates for you. Okay, I let it do that for me. It's fine, and it's worked okay. But once you want to deploy it into your CI/CD onto GitHub Actions, you have to have a full understanding of everything before you can even begin to think. Well, now, to be fair, that part is about the same with Android, because on Android, if you're deploying into Google Play Store requires that it to be signed as well. Okay, I understand that. Maybe I'm a little too harsh on iOS, but at least the local part, give me the ability to do it locally without having to sign it. In any case, that's the iOS part. So what happened last week was I spent some time understanding what I need to do here, and now the app does deploy locally onto my iPhone. I can test it on my iPhone. That works well. Last week, I also set up the CI/CD pipeline for the iOS leg to be developed onto TestFlight directly. So now there's another issue here. GitHub Actions for a macOS runner. If you want to build your iOS app, by the way, you have to run it under iOS. Like, you can't build it under Linux or Windows. Android doesn't care. You can build it in all three major platforms. But iOS, you have to build it on a macOS. You have to use Xcode tools. So in my CI/CD pipeline for GitHub Actions, I had to rent a macOS runner. macOS runners cost 10 times as much. My build action takes 30 minutes. And this is a small app, by the way. But to be fair, I'm not using caching because I'm updating so quickly. Caching doesn't really work. I benchmarked it. It didn't really work. It might shave like a minute or two, but that's about it. My deployment action takes 30 minutes to run. And Mac runners cost 10 times, which is 300 minutes. An account only gives you 2,000 free minutes. In other words, every month I can deploy about 7 times and all my minutes would be used up. So, and this is not the only problem. The other problem is that if I want to, with Android, every time when I push to my remote does a full Android build and test, right? Build verification as well as tests. That uses Linux, which costs 1 time, right? Linux is baseline, Windows is 2 times, macOS is 10 times. If I want to do a iOS build verification as well as tests, I don't have any iOS tests, so that's moot. But if I want to do an iOS build verification, I can't afford to do that every time I push to remote. So that's disabled. All the verifications are done locally now. My repo doesn't enforce verification, which makes me very uncomfortable. With all that said, there is an outlet. So I do have a Mac. And one of the things that you can do with a Mac is installing a remote. I can't remember the exact GitHub terminology for it, but you can install a remote runner on your personal device, and then it will actually tunnel back into GitHub. And every time when you push something, when you activate a GitHub Actions on GitHub, your GitHub account would actually ping your remote and then run it locally. So that doesn't consume your minutes. So that's the goal for next week, setting up a remote GitHub runner for my macOS so that I can do repo level, remote site build verification for iOS as well as deployments without consuming my minutes in like a week. Or really less than a week, probably just a couple of days. In any case, so to summarize, last week decided on Codex for AI and completed CI/CD for iOS TestFlight. Next week, deploy the remote runner for iOS for macOS onto my personal laptop, and then surface the TestFlight app, because now the TestFlight app is just in my account, but I don't think it's actually publicly reachable. And I think that there is stuff that I need to do to make that happen. I have not looked into that yet, so that'll be the goal for next week as well, in addition to, of course, setting up the GitHub remote runner. That's it for this week. I will see you next week.